Today on the Roundhouse, we're going for a ride behind Norfolk Western 611 at the Strasburg Rail Road. All aboard!
In days past, the roundhouse was where the railroad worker united with the steam locomotive, each to prepare for the journey ahead. Today, it's where we examine the history, the industry, the machines, the hobby, and the passion behind railroading. News, interviews, stories, and more. So climb aboard. This is The Roundhouse.
Welcome to the Roundhouse. I'm your host, Nick Ozerak, and this is episode number 111 of our Trains and Railroading podcast, where we talk about everything in the industry and the hobby. You name it, we discuss it. Today, we are going for a ride behind Norfolk Western 611 at the Strasburg Rail Road. We're also going to talk with a few of the people who are involved with the logistics of making these events happen, looking over the equipment, and we're also going to have some interesting side trips. We're going to ride behind it. We're going to experience a cab tour, the whistle blow. A lot of fun to be had. Before we get into that, I want to announce that today's episode is sponsored by Streamliner Media. For all of your video needs in advertising, whether you are in the tourist railroad or freight railroading business, Streamliner Media has you covered. Visit streamlinermedia.com to learn more. If this is your first time listening to The Roundhouse, then welcome aboard. You're going to have a great time listening to all of the conversations we have on this show. You can find more of them at theroundhousepodcast.com. And if you become a particular fan and want to support the show financially, patreon.com/theroundhouse. For as little as $1 a month, you're helping to make episodes like this happen. I really appreciate it. And those of you who are already supporting the show, thank you very much. Right now, we're waiting in line to do a cab tour of 611. It is a overcast day, which you might think is a bad thing, but from my perspective, it's not. A, because it's really humid, and so if the sun was beating down, it would make a very hot day. And B, because if you've been around steam when it's overcast or a little moist in the air, you get all of these wonderful steam effects. So it really accentuates the look of the engine that much more.
Good morning.
Good morning.
Welcome to the 611. Ted, our engineer. Morning. Spencer, fireman. Good morning. I'm with the 611. I'll give you a little tour here. Throttle, power reverse, that gives you your forwards and backwards. Injector, that's one of the ways to put water in a boiler. Various gauges, speedometer, boiler pressure, air brake gauges. Cylinder cocks, when you see that steam coming out in front of the engine, that's getting the water out of the cylinders when it's really cold. See this brakes? This is a train brake. This controls the whole train. This is the independent, controls the engine. Water glasses, if you go over to the side, you can see it tells you how much water's in the boiler. Top of the crown sheet, that's where your steel is at. If that water gets below that, you better look out. Up here you got a low water alarm. If the water does get too low, that whistle will start blowing and telling you better get water in the boiler. Fire box, there's not much of a fire in there right now, but over here, the fireman, he watches what the engineer's doing. If he's using a lot of steam, you got to stay after it, more coal, more water. Boiler pressure gauge over here. This is the second way of putting water in a boiler. It's called a feed water pump. That uses exhaust steam out of the engine to heat the water. Stoker jets on that, if you can see it on here, there's a table in there. That coal comes up, drops on that table, and this top one controls the amount of pressure you're blowing it out there, just depending on what kind of coal you have. And the bottom one here is actually, there's a stoker motor, 2-cylinder steam engine underneath the cab here. Got a drive shaft, goes back to a gearbox, and then there's a worm gear It pulls it up here, drops it on that table. What else we got here? Whistle. Our paperwork, we have to have that when the engine's live. Down there, that green handle, that actually reverses this. At the end of the day, you don't want that coal catching fire in that tube. So at the end of the day, you pull that reversing lever and backs all the coal back that way. So the silver handle is what's called a blowdown. You know, if you were going down the railroad every 10 miles or so, you'd pull that for 2 or 3 seconds just to blow all the sediment out of the boiler.
Now the gauges in the brake stand, that's a more modern addition than what it would have been built with, right?
That's a 26 brake. You guys have 6, is it?
We have 6 ET. And this engine originally had what, 24, Tom?
Yeah, well, yeah, it had the newer, but when they redid it, they put the 26 in it.
This is kind of the current brake stand that's used on railroads today. I think there's a couple modernizations for some of the newer diesels that have all the electronic interfaces and stuff like that. But this has been kind of the standard brake stand for probably the last 20 years or so or better.
The takeaway from the cab tour is it's really sizable in there. I feel like you could practically have your picnic in there, depending on how many people that you had. But it's, compared to some of the cabs I've seen, it is really spacious. But given the amount of crews have to be on site, that's probably a good thing. I'm here with Brendan Ziegler, who's the Chief Mechanical Officer for the Strasburg Rail Road. How are you doing today, Brendan?
I'm great, Nick. Thanks for coming in and talking to us today.
On a regular non-611 day, what do your roles as Chief Mechanical Officer for the railroad include?
So I'm responsible for our mechanical facilities here, which includes our mechanical shop or our back shop, which is our heavy repair facility, our restoration facility, and then responsible for our running repair shop and engine house, where we maintain our steam locomotives, diesel locomotives, and for all of our operating on-rail equipment, and directing all the personnel that perform all the maintenance and repair work on all of that equipment, and who conduct all of our contracted mechanical services.
Now that 611 is here, what does that add to your role, or how does that factor into the work that you're doing already?
It adds another level of complexity because it's another piece of equipment that has to be maintained for regular operation, and it adds a level of complexity in that it's a visiting piece of equipment. So we have to coordinate its operations and its maintenance needs around the schedules of our previously existing passenger and freight operation needs. Which means we have to make sure that we have switch crews assigned to be able to move their equipment around as needed. Periodically, we have to have our mechanical personnel assist them with maintenance needs, and we have to provide operating crews to help operate the locomotive.
That last piece, providing the operating crews, so what are the typical roles for the regular excursions? Who is taking on what responsibility for each trip?
On every trip that the 611 makes pulling our regular passenger train, we have both staff from VMT, from the Virginia Museum of Transportation, and from Strasburg Rail Road. Typically, we have 2 crew members from each organization on board, and based upon their qualifications, they'll take turns operating and firing the locomotive throughout the day. They rotate on and off. We have at least one designated supervisor of locomotive engineers from our staff that's on board at all times while the 611's operating.
Let's rewind the clock. What were the conversations and how long did they take to be able to set up this whole season of events?
I was not involved in a lot of the discussions leading up to the event this time around. We were discussing that with VMT going all the way back to 2019. when we had the first event with 611 here. And starting late last year, we started up conversations again about the possibility of a 2021 event. And those talks lasted all the way up until just a few weeks before 611 made its trip from Spencer to here.
What do you appreciate about having the Locomotive visit the Strasburg Railroad?
I really appreciate the opportunity to work with the Virginia Museum of Transportation and their staff, their outstanding crews that VMT has, and the opportunity to work with them is always a pleasure. And it also gives us the opportunity to meet a whole lot of interesting, really great people that are enthusiastic about what we do. They're enthusiastic about the locomotive and about the Strasburg Rail Road, and that's all very exciting to see.
John Mark Overman asks, are there any challenges with operating 611 on the Strasburg Railroad given its size?
Given its size, there are probably less challenge, a smaller number of challenges than you would think. Our track department has our right-of-way and our infrastructure in very good condition. We haul 256K freight cars on a regular basis over our line. So heavy axle loadings are something that our infrastructure is designed to handle. The rigidity of the wheelbase of the engine has an effect going through tight turnouts and tight curves. We have noticed a need to be more proactive in track repair and maintenance, especially on switches, just to make sure that they're all staying tight and not presenting a danger. Yeah, from the biggest challenge is the track infrastructure and just making sure that 611 does not pound it all to pieces. And then the other thing that's probably a challenge is when 611 is operating frequently, is for our water treatment system to be able to keep up with the demand that 611 has. One filling of the tender on 611 drains half of our water tower capacity. So we need to plan accordingly so that we don't use up all the water at one time, so that our locomotives don't have any.
Have you either operated or fired for the engine yet this season?
I fired it once this year. When it was here in 2019, I had the opportunity to run it a number of times. I've mostly been on the ground doing administrative work and haven't really had much opportunity to be in the cab. The one thing that I have had the opportunity to do is to serve as an instructor for our in-cab experiences days, where we've had guests operating the locomotive and firing the locomotive, and to serve as an instructor for those guests.
How then would you compare it in terms of how it feels to the engines that you're used to operating here, 90, 475, and 89?
It feels big by comparison. That's one of the obvious distinguishing features. The other thing is it feels like you are, when it's operating here, operating well below its rated capacity. And that is the case for some of our engines in certain circumstances where we really baby our locomotives as well. But you can tell in operating the 611 that there's just a substantial amount of reserve power and capability there that's not being put to use on our short little railroad.
To equate it to a car, I sort of imagine it like having a Ferrari, and every time you just tap the accelerator, it just wants to take off.
Yeah, I've used the same analogy where it's like test driving a Maserati at 10 miles an hour. It's neat, but you don't get all the thrill.
What has been something since you got to experience in 2019 and here we are in 2021 that you appreciate now that it's a full season of different types of experiences offered for people as opposed to just having it all happen in 1 month?
I appreciate the opportunity for more people to see the engine and to experience it. That's probably the greatest thing that I can see. The other thing that I appreciate from an employment standpoint is that it creates a much more relaxed atmosphere around the events. When we did this in 2019, it was kind of like a hell month where everybody was working very long hours in a very concentrated time frame to pull everything off. And this year, it's just sort of become part of our regular daily lives, and so there's a lot less stress associated with its operation.
From a guest perspective, something that I appreciated is that ordinarily seeing mainline steam, it's 1 or 2 weekends, so there's just huge throngs of people. So I imagine as well from a guest experience perspective, being able to thin out the crowds helps ease everybody's nerves when it comes to keeping it a safe operation as a whole.
Yeah, that's absolutely true. The smaller crowds overall are much easier to control. The potential safety hazards with all the other things that happen around our property here, from freight transloading to other switching operations. Anytime you reduce the number of people in a crowd, you reduce the number of potential hazards. Also, it's reduced the amount of negative interactions that we've had during the course of this with our neighboring property owners. We all, most people that come and see the 611 are very polite. They're very, they're here to see the engine and want to experience it in the way that we've asked everybody to experience it with us. There's always going to be these, buck-toothed, big-eared types walking around that think they know everything and own everything, and that can ruin the experience for people. And there was some of that last time around with people going in places, on neighboring properties where they weren't invited. But that's really been diminished this year significantly.
How are your own steam locomotives doing right now? What's the mechanical status of each of them?
All of our steam locomotives are great. They're so our 3 engines that we have serviceable right now are all in normal operating condition. Number 90 is in steam right now, and we'll operate on a special train later this evening, and we'll operate over the weekend. And after that, she's about out of service days for her monthly cycle, and number 475 will go back into service for her spot in the rotation. And number 89 is stored serviceable and ready to go right now. I would expect to see a lot more of her going into the fall and winter season, and probably a lot less of number 90. Number 90 is getting closer to her 1,472 service day inspection, and so we're going to try to conserve days on her throughout the next probably 18 months or so, and utilize more of 89 and 475.
Something I've been seeing discussed online recently is that it looks like number 31, your first steam locomotive, appears to be back on the block as far as its restoration is concerned. What is the game plan with that at this point in time?
So recently we went through a fairly thorough process of establishing a scope of work to complete the rebuild that was started in 2009 on number 31, and that plan, scope of work, and an estimate for that was submitted to our board of directors, and we received approval to move forward with the completion of that project. 31 has been moved into the shop. We're still in the infancy of the work on that project, but we intend to complete that as early as possible, and hope to coordinate that completion with the timing for number 90 being taken out of service for her 1472. We feel the need to have 3 locomotives at a minimum at this point to support our operations, and the timing for number 90's upcoming inspection largely played a role in looking at returning 31 to service. I would say there may not be a whole lot visible going on in the next couple of weeks or months here, but barring any other events that would preclude us from working on it, you should see some progress on that in the next few months.
Because it's notably smaller than its shed mates, how does 31 potentially factor into the operating scheme of things?
31 has more tractive effort than number 89, and it's probably just as well suited as any of our other engines for all but our heaviest trains. Over the years, the crews have expressed their dislike for operating the engine, and that largely has to do with its ride characteristics. In all honesty, I will be very interested to see whether or not there is a significant improvement there after all the work that we've completed, because as I think many people know, 31 was not extensively overhauled at any point during its time in service here at the railroad. It was always the last engine used, and least frequently used, and because of that, a lot of work wasn't put into it over the years. So in 2009, we made the determination that it needed a complete overhaul. So I think there's a good potential. It'll always be an 060, but I hope very much that the ride characteristics are improved because of the excellent condition that the machinery will be in when it returns to service. As a side note, I was the engineer the last day that 31 ran in 2009, and I hope to have the opportunity to be the engineer the first day that it runs after we can turn it out of the shop, and would very much like to make that comparison to see how the ride quality is.
I'm always curious to get every Strasburg Railroad member's crew on this. Which is your favorite to operate?
Generally, 89 is the most enjoyable. It presents the greatest challenge because of it having a manual Johnson bar type reverser, and also because it is being operated the closest to its true capacity. 475 and 90 both are significantly overpowered for the size of the trains that we typically run here. Number 90 is, everybody calls it the Cadillac. It's she is for sure the most comfortable and user-friendly of the locomotives that we have, but 89 for me is the most enjoyable.
Chris Tokarczyk asks, how is the work coming along for the new freight business they picked up?
Progress is going at the speed of government grants for our new freight yard. We're constructing a new transload facility in Lemon Place on the north side of the Amtrak, on the south side of the Amtrak main line, on the north side of the Route 30 overpass. And that facility will serve a number of different customers. when it's completed, it'll have several new transload tracks, a new freight dock. That construction work is proceeding there as scheduled right now, and I would expect to see that go into operation sometime early next year. And we just ask that anybody that's in the area, please avoid that property right now for your own safety while construction is going on there.
Lastly, Jason Smerciak asks, is there a possibility of other steam stars visiting Strasbourg, such as Nickel Plate 765?
We would be open to a number of different possibilities as far as other visiting locomotives. It's simply a matter of logistics and coordination, and working out an agreement that's suitable to both parties. I think we would be happy to have the 765 or any other locomotive visit us here and participate in a similar type of event, as long as it was suitable for all the parties involved.
Specifically to 611, Austin Poole asks, could we see more events between Strasbourg and 611 like we have in 2019 and 2021?
Yeah, I think there's the potential for more events in the future. It's always a fluid situation with the relationship with Class 1 railroads and whether or not we can have equipment moved here and what the scheduling requirements are. But we are very open to any sort of outside of the box opportunity.
Brian J. Smith asks, has anyone from either crew cooked the Pennsylvania Dutch specialty of scrapple on the footplate?
Not that I know of.
Excellent. Brendan, thank you so much.
Thank you, Nick.
I decided the best way to experience 611 for my ride behind the engine was to go into one of Strasburg Railroad's open-air cars, specifically their Hello Dolly car, which they put right next to the locomotive. It has this really neat observation deck that means you get to be right next to the nose of the engine. That's something that you can't experience on the main line. Here we are as we depart Strasbourg. You'll get to hear it working the hill as it goes east, and the famous ghost whistle. Another thing I'm appreciating about the ride today is the fact that ordinarily, if you want the open air experience, you gotta take your turn in one of the passenger car vestibules. But here at Strasbourg, with these open air cars, you don't have that kind of competition to be able to appreciate the sights and sounds. And I have to say, the open air wind and the experience of having the wind blowing through you is really quite comfortable, especially on a humid day like today. I'm here with Dave Lotfy, who is the superintendent of locomotives and rolling stock. Dave, when we last had you on the podcast, it was all the way back in 2015, and you were just starting out, and now here you are. Talk to us about what being this superintendent position entails.
I would have to say the superintendent position is a dream job. It really is. I think I do have a dream job because my responsibility is to the locomotives and to the passenger cars and to the heritage freight. So it's my responsibility to make sure that they are taken care of, they are in operation, and that there's any issues, I take care of them, which means I have to have an outstanding group of people to be responsible for to help me see those tasks through. So it is really, I pinch myself every single day. I really do.
What has it been like for you to start all the way out as a boiler apprentice way back 2015 and now to have progressed your career to this point, and how has Strasburg helped you in progressing your career?
Strasburg Rail Road has helped me in progressing my career by nurturing my passion, my drive, and my desire to always do better. This railroad has taken such good care of me. I have nothing but the utmost respect for the people that I've worked under, and I have nothing but the utmost respect for the talent that I have learned from. This railroad, if you show any interest, if you show that you care, they will do everything they can to get you on your path. And I am the perfect example of that. Look at where I started. I was essentially scraping grease. I didn't even know what a wrench was, essentially, and I'm at this position now. And that is all because of the partnership I have with this railroad.
On top of the fun that you ordinarily get to have and this dream job, now you have a dream locomotive visiting your fleet. What responsibilities does that add for you personally?
The responsibilities that 611 adds for me personally are to Scott Lindsay. Scott Lindsay and I work together quite a bit to make sure that any peripheral issues that have been unresolved or have come up that were unexpected, he needs my help. And that could be anything, anywhere from, hey, we've got issues with coal. We need coal delivered. I'm down a couple volunteers. I'm down help here. I need help hostling the engine. I need help moving it here. I need help moving it there. So there are some logistical responsibilities that have been added to my plate. There have been responsibilities in getting my crew to assist with some minor repairs with 611. So it is essentially like a sister engine to ours, just bigger and a little bit more of a walk from the tool board. So those are the responsibilities it has added to me. And I'd like to add in that it has also built some great friendships. These are a wonderful group of people, dedicated, committed, good, honest people that take really good care of you, that you just want to do right by, if that makes any sense.
Have you had an opportunity to actually operate the locomotive yet?
I have actually, yes. I've had a couple of opportunities. When we were doing the throttle experience, which you have students that are allowed to run the engine, and I was teaching them as one of the training engineers, I was given the opportunity both times to run it all the way back from Lemon Place all the way back to Strasbourg. And also in 2019, they were doing some shuttle runs with it, which gave me some opportunities to run it down the line as well.
How would you describe it compared to the regular engines you get to operate?
It is the finest piece of equipment I've ever run, by far. Not to say that our engines aren't fine pieces of equipment, but you can really tell a difference between our engines and a state-of-the-art engine like number 611. Number one, it's unbelievably quiet because everything's roller bearing. You know, you have roller bearing axles, roller bearing rods. Everything is so unbelievably quiet. On our engines, you're relying on the sound of the rods. You're relying on the sound of the stack. Now, keep in mind, I've only run it a couple times, so I haven't developed an experience to get used to all the sounds of that engine. I had to rely on some of the gauges to help me run that engine, where on our engines, you can just hear from the sounds of the rods, the sounds of the stack, the sounds of what's going on. You have those senses that are completely eliminated because this thing is so quiet. It's unbelievable. And the throttle, it has a front-end throttle, an American multiple front-end throttle, and they are very precise. They are very easy to control. You can literally move on a dime, and it is unbelievably precise. That Baker valve gear is the same thing. And our brake system, we use 6ET, which is a very old system. They use 26 air on this one. And one thing I noticed about the application zones of both the automatic and the independent, it is unbelievably sensitive. I mean, you move it over in the application zone just a small amount, and it's instantly responsive. It's beautifully responsive. Where older equipment like 6ET equipment, there's a lag, there's a delay. This does not have that. So again, modern equipment, modern technology, state of the art. You're getting all those wonderful attributes when you're running it.
Because you've led some of the in-cab experiences or been part of the mentoring process for that, what do you find most rewarding for introducing people to this technology who are actually getting to operate it at some capacity?
One of the most rewarding things is getting people to say, "This is the best day of my life," which is amazing when some of them have their wife standing right next to them. I just stay out of that one. But really, to see an adult act like a little kid again because they're living a lifelong dream, and I get to be part of that and show them that excitement and get them to get into it. And then what happens is a lot of times they start listening more carefully and they start applying what you're telling them, and they're running the engine really well themselves. And you're being more encouraging to them, which gives them more confidence, and they're, next thing they know, they're running this engine and they're having a great time. And it's an experience that is a once-in-a-lifetime experience, and I'm one of the few people on this planet that get to be part of that. That is extremely rewarding. Absolutely.
The idea of having to adjust to the locomotive as well, for me, even just doing a quick whistle blow, there's the difference between just pulling it and blat, it comes out, versus the nuance that you feel when you get really comfortable with that fact that it is an analog machine. It is not a digital machine by any stretch. And it's interesting to hear how that carries over into the operation. And I imagine that carries over into the operation of your regular fleet as well. So with that said, what is your favorite locomotive of your fleet?
Now that's a trick question. Honestly, I do not have a favorite. And I'll tell you why. One of the wonderful things about this railroad is we have 4 completely different class locomotives, right? We have a switcher, we have a passenger engine, we have a freight engine, and we have essentially a dual service engine. Now these are 4 completely different classes that we have saturated engines, we have superheated engines, we have Baker valve gear, Walschaerts valve gear, Stevenson valve gear, and you're getting the best of all of them. And each of them have a wonderful quality about them. And each of them have a quirk about them. For example, 475 has Baker valve gear. And I love running that engine because it is so easy to fine tune the valve gear on that engine. If you go in the cab and you look at the quadrant, the teeth are so fine and so closely put together that one notch, you can hear it in the stack. It's very sensitive and very responsive to that. So I run that engine wide open throttle on the way back home from Lemon Place. People are amazed that I actually run that engine wide open, but a lot of us do. You can. It's designed in a way that you can run it wide open, run it from the reverser, and maintain your speed, which is actually the most efficient way to run a locomotive. And then you have 89. 89 is a little 10-wheeler that everybody loves. We call her the sweetheart. She's a fast little engine. She loves to go fast. She works at capacity on this line, and she just wants to get up and go. She's just a sweet girl. And then you have 90, the arguably the most popular engine of the fleet. Large engine, very powerful, will do anything you ask of it, and it has the most comfortable cab you can imagine. Wonderfully ergonomic cab, incredible amounts of power at your control, very responsive engine, and one of the most beautiful whistles I've ever heard or had the pleasure of blowing.
Looking at the cars, what do you find the most special aspect both of the passenger and the freight fleets?
The commitment to history. That's what I find most special about the cars, is that we have a commitment to keeping them historic, and as much as we can, keeping the historic fabric on them. Now we can put, for example, in the running gear part, which most people don't care about, most of the passengers don't care about what kind of brake valves we have on there, but we do. And if you look underneath there, we have P valves on there. We're not using more modern brake valves like AB or ABDX. We have old passenger valves, old P valves, P1s, P2s, L3s, and or L valves, and also our president's car has UC brake valves. That is a wonderful skill to have, because you have to learn how to repair those brake valves. So those are the skills that we keep as well. We keep the skills to learn how to repair those valves, to be able to diagnose issues with those valves, and to keep those valves alive on the historic equipment that they were designed with. That is a wonderful feature to have at a railroad like this. The wood coaches are actually wood. The inlay is still in there. The original chandeliers are there, and in the wintertime, they're actually heated with coal-fired stoves. That's incredible. That's great. I couldn't believe it when I first came here myself. That was one of the most incredible things to me about the coaches, was they were beautifully warm from coal stoves, like it was back in the day.
Looking at what you've already done this season and looking forward to what remains, what are you most excited about to experience, or that you have experienced?
Oh, that's a hard question to answer. What am I most excited about to experience? One thing is more seat time and more experience with 611. Just because it's a state-of-the-art engine, the more I'm on it, the more excited I am about that engine, and the more I appreciate what went into designing and building that engine. So that's one thing I'm really excited about, is more experience with that. I recently have been promoted as a DSLE engineer, which is a training engineer. That is another thing I'm really excited about, is training younger engineers, newer engineers, to become excellent enginemen themselves. So that is something that's new for me that I'm really excited about sharing with future candidates.
Sharing that love of the learning you've experienced and getting more people involved, I think a lot of people look at something as impressive as 611 or the history that you're operating on a regular basis, even outside of this event. And it feels overwhelming, which is positive from an emotional experience, but it can also sort of create a distance of feeling like I can do that. And since you have learned so much through your past 6 roughly years here, what advice do you offer to folks who love this, want to become involved, may be intimidated because they don't have a lot of mechanical knowledge already, whether they'd want to pursue it as a career item or at the very least a volunteering item at a railroad that might be near them?
That is an outstanding question. Let me share with you a little bit of my story, because I can relate to this. You're talking to someone who is a professional musician most of their life. I had no mechanical experience, nothing like that. However, when I had a medical condition which permanently ended my career. It wasn't a choice I had, it was something I had to do, and my career was over. So, I had good parents. They taught me to go after my dreams in life, and I've never worked a day in my life. So, my dad got me into steam railroading. Now, I've always been a rail fan, I've always loved steam, and I always wanted to see, well, maybe this is something I could do for a living. It's something I'm really passionate about, but I know nothing about it. So what I did is, the first thing I did is I found a tourist line that had a volunteer program. That's the first piece of advice I give to anyone. If there's something that you're interested in that you have no experience with, the best way in is as a volunteer. And if that means you have to drive a distance to do it, then do it. Absolutely do it. because what that offers to you is free of charge an experience that you can get to find out if this is something that you really want to do, because it'll expose you to the good and the bad. And like with any job or any passion or any career, there's a good side and there's a bad side. There's the good times, there's the bad times, and there's everything in the middle. And a lot of people, the passengers, the kids, they see the engineer up in the cab and they think, man, I'd love to have your job. But they don't see behind the scenes. They don't see when the engine's not hot, when I'm covered in soot from head to toe, or those super hot days when there's a failure in the firebox and I gotta crawl inside that firebox when we just dumped a hot fire. They don't see that side of it. And you have to accept that side of it. And you have to learn to love the difficult parts about the job as well. And appreciate you can't have a hot engine without the hot work. That's the first piece of advice I give to anyone. Volunteer. See if you like it. See if you're into it. And if you're into it, then work hard, study, read. There are some great books out there. ICS manuals, which are the International Correspondence Schools, and they have a whole locomotive course that goes into the details of the brake system, the injectors, the boilers, the freight equipment as far as the brake equipment is concerned, stokers, firing engines, locomotive management. There's detailed books on all of this that you can learn and study, and you can apply it in these volunteer programs. Talk with people that are in the industry. Talk to other volunteers. Talk to people that are doing it for a living. Ask them what it's like. Talk to them about the benefits, about what's so hard about the job, what's so good about the job. Really understand what you're getting into. All of this advice I'm giving anyone who's listening will help you have your dreams come true like mine did.
That is some excellent advice right there. Given that it is a food tradition around here, are you aware of anyone who has made scrapple on or within 611's firebox?
Yes, I am. I am aware of it, and I know a couple guys that have done it also on a couple of the other engines, and I got to tell you, it tastes pretty good.
Well, there you have it. Now we know that 611's been fully inducted into Dutch country.
Yes.
Folk. Thank you so much, David.
You are very welcome. It's been a pleasure.
We've arrived back at East Strasbourg, and now I'm part of a group of a dozen or so folks that are walking up to the engine, and we're going to go to blow the whistle. Woo woo indeed. There's the whistle blow. So, interesting things to note. One, they put a piece of wood to prevent you from giving the full power of the whistle, which makes sense because we're in the station. It could get pretty loud very quickly. The other thing is that you really get appreciation for how much of a feel you have to get for blowing it, because the first time I tugged on it, you just get that a full blast. The key is to get the nuance. So if you want to get that kind of partial and then full, it's really a matter of getting the feel of it. So you're pulling just enough to get that soft sound. Unless you want that. See, he got the feel of it right there. The guy in the cab right now, you get that little sound and then you can increase it. It's an interesting art, for sure. I'm here with Scott Lindsay, who's the Chief Mechanical Officer for 611, working on behalf of Virginia Museum of Transportation. Scott, how are you doing today?
Very well, thank you, Nick.
It's good to have you on the show again. We first talked way back in 2015, and it's been an amazing 6 years to see what 611's accomplished since then. 2019 was the first season that the Locomotive visited Strasbourg. What led to that first visit, and then how were things able to be positioned to be able to repeat that for a longer span of time in 2021?
The idea initially was mine, and having grown up in the area, I've been coming to Strasburg Rail Road since I was a little kid, and had the opportunity to speak with Strasbourg then President Lynn Modinger at a conference many years ago on the idea of bringing 611 here if it were to physically be able to, for infrastructure and all the logistics that need to happen, if there was any interest in that. And he was interested, and we set the wheels in motion, no pun intended, to do all the due diligence on the front end. Can the locomotive physically run over the railroad? What are the restrictions? And looked into those details and saw that it could physically operate here. And then it took quite a few years to pull all the logistics together for being able to bring it here. And of course, we couldn't do anything without the support of Norfolk Southern. So we're grateful to them for any opportunity to be willing to relocate us around the system to allow 611 to be out and represent railroad history and steam technology. So without NS, we wouldn't be doing anything. So it just took a long time to pull all the logistics together to be able to do that 2019 event, which was called the Reunion of Steam, 611 and 475, the two operable N&W engines currently. It was very successful. People were climbing, out of the walls to, everything sold out immediately, and off-site parking, it was jammed. So with the success of that, at the conclusion of 2019, kind of internally between the two organizations, kind of take 2020 away from it and look at 2021 as a second opportunity to repeat the success of 19 with some of the same and some new and different events. And we had a lot of time in 2020, as everybody did, to start pulling some of this together. 2020 was pretty dry steam season for everyone, a little more pressing issues like staying alive. So it's been great to be back.
It's good to have you back here, although I say that like I live here and I'm just a visitor as well. You've been with this engine on a number of incredible adventures, mainline steam. What makes bringing it to Strasbourg unique for you?
I like the chance to bring it here and provide events for people, creating another fan base. We have the remaining fans from when it ran in regular service in the 50s, and then the fans from the 80s and 90s NS Steam program that are still out there. And now with the events here at Strasbourg, where you can ride the excursions like we're doing today, doing fire-up tours, hostling tours, at the throttles, fireman seats, tender jump seat rides, bringing it to a new generation of people to keep steam alive and create a new fan base that will keep 611 alive long after I'm not doing this anymore. So I think the main line is great, and we love being out there, but this opportunity to do this type of event, I think, is very, very important for the longevity of steam.
I think you're right. The fact that you're able to have these in-cab experiences with actually getting to fire or run it, or something as simple as just even the whistle blow. Mainline steam excursions, you've got this large crowd, they can get their photo with it, but that's about it. So to be able to bring it to this environment where the crowd is thinner because it's a whole season long, and you can actually get to talk to more people because there's less pressure on any individual day than there would be if it was a long distance excursion. That must be pretty gratifying as well.
Oh, absolutely. And here you can take a ride on it on the 11 o'clock train, and then sit and have lunch and watch it come in and out of the depot all day long, or drive down the line and watch it at one of the crossings. And just watching the little kids and the younger folks really take a liking to it. And I know from my own experience, I've got a lot of little grandboys, 4 of them. The 2 oldest ones love 611. It's all they want to talk about, watching the videos and going to see it wherever they can. So creating that new fan base, because one of these little kids out here could end up being a hedge fund manager and want to see 611 run again in 40 years, 30 years, and they write the checks to make it happen. So I think we're creating some really positive memories and really enjoy bringing it to the younger folks and answering the questions and sometimes over and over and over again the same question, but they're interested enough to ask questions, and it gets them off the iPhone and be able to experience something that America built back when America really built things.
And it's good on you to be willing to be a patient teacher and answer those repeated questions over and over and over. Can you talk about the benefits of having access to the shops here in Strasbourg, the fact that if maintenance needs to be performed, that you have this world-class facility right here to be able to assist in those repairs?
Oh, absolutely. The folks at Strasbourg have been very accommodating when we've had some issues, and getting things repaired and ready for us, a lot of times overnight by magic. Very talented group of people, and STEAM experienced. I don't have to worry about going to some machine shop that can do the work, but they don't understand the application. And that's a battle that's fought internally with STEAM all the time. So here you don't have that. So it's been great to be here, and I've known a lot of the folks here, especially the older people, for many years, just because we're all doing the same thing in different places and through the associations and conferences, things like that. Gotten to know everyone, and Strasbourg is a great supplier of parts like stay bolts and stay bolt related items and rivets and things like that for 611 and many other projects out there.
Chris Eden Green asks, how long does 611 take to fire up from cold, and how much does it approximately cost in terms of fuel to run her at the Strasburg Railroad per day?
For the fire up question, from a cold start, we bring it up in about 8 hours. It's a tremendous volume of water being boiled and heating the steel. We want to bring the temperature up slowly. The locomotive grows quite a lot from cold to hot, and we don't want to strain the firebox and boiler any more than necessary. So bringing it up slow and cooling it down slow are important for the longevity of the firebox, and it's about an 8 hour day. She'll start making steam in about 4 hours, and then we just keep slowly bringing it up until we bring it up to working pressure on the fire up day. And as far as the cost to run it every day, we use on the main line, pulling the 20-car passenger train up and down Norfolk Southern for the purpose of planning refueling. We use about a ton of coal every 10 miles and about 200 gallons of water per mile. So that's our refueling parameters, and it's higher and lower depending on other conditions, uphill, downhill, riprap, whatever the railroad is. Here, really haven't figured out, and don't need to, because while we're running back and forth, we don't go far and don't pull much. I say it's crop dusting with a 747. I think we've figured about 18 tons over a 3-day period, which is nothing. We hold 35 when it's full. So I haven't done any math with that times the price of coal that's trucked in.
I've been asking the Strasbourg guys what their experiences are running 611. Have you had an opportunity to run any of the Strasbourg engines while you've been here?
No, I have not. Those large engines intimidate me, so I just stick with 611. So that's what I tell them anyway. No, I mean, my responsibility is 611, and while I appreciate their engines and I've looked at them, watched them move around and whatever, I rode one back from Lemon Place when we got crew relief for a in-cab experience weekend day. I rode the 475 cab back to East Strasbourg, but just as a rider to get back. I'm not here. I've always kind of like to be in the shadows. I don't ever want to show up anywhere and assume I'm going to do anything, because that's not how I am. I'm a behind the scenes, trying to make everything work. And my commitment here is to be around 611, and don't want to be out of pocket too far should I be needed for anything or nothing. So no, I appreciate opportunities to see them and what they do, and it's a great experience all the way around, and I love having them run and fire 611 and showing them a whole different world of steam.
You're showing a lot of people, whether it be their crews or the people who are having the in-cab experiences, or just people who are able to watch it in action. And as you say, being able to even just sit at the depot here and watching it come in and out is kind of a neat treat in and of itself, rather than having to chase it along an interstate and go from crossing to crossing. It makes it a little easier to fan over it here.
Absolutely. It's and it's a lot of fun to watch. The families and little kids. Some of the little kids cry; they're scared of it, and others are like, "Wow!" They want to get right up next to it. So it's a wide and varying crowd that. They all like the size of the wheels. That's probably the most prevalent comment is, "Wow, those wheels are big."
They are, and especially if you're younger, right, then they're that much bigger.
Right, especially if you're 4.
Marshall Lewis asks, what are the future plans for 611 after its season here at Strasbourg?
As of now, there's no at least public comment on that. It's still under development, but I don't have anything to publicly say here.
Fair enough. My last question for you is, as you've been having the season here, what do you appreciate most about what your experience has been?
Again, to kind of repeat what I said a few minutes ago, bringing it to many generations of people who don't know anything about a steam locomotive, what it is, how important it was to the development of the country and expansion westward and industrial age, and back when America really built good stuff, not the junk that's out there today. And getting people an appreciation of what this country used to do, and how important it was and still is, but we just don't recognize anything more than typing an email and watching Facebook and ordering something on Amazon.
It's good to be able to appreciate such an impressive feat of American engineering, and in such a nice setting. Scott, thank you so much.
Thank you very much, Nick. Appreciate the opportunity.
There you have it. A day on the Strasburg Rail Road with Norfolk and Western 611. My first time experiencing the steam locomotive in operation, getting to ride behind it. I want to thank the Strasburg Railroad for hosting me and giving me all this access, both to the engine and the crew who run it. They do an amazing job throughout the year. This event was particularly special, and I encourage you, if you have the chance and you're listening to this in September of 2021, to make a visit to the railroad before 611 goes back to Virginia. Otherwise, make sure that you check out their calendar of events, see if it's coming back or if something else exciting is happening in the meantime.
And now, the question of the day.
Last time on the Roundhouse, we were talking to author Rick Kafuri, who wrote the book Steam Trains of Yesteryear, The Monadnock Steam Town and Northern Story. And what a story it is to explore Steamtown's early history and that of F. Nelson Blount. That led to the question, what is your favorite railroad history book? A lot of you responded. Here are some of the ones that I selected. From Twitter, Joshua Sturgill writes, my collection isn't very large, so take this for what it's worth, but Conquering Gotham by Jill Jones. Nick Benson writes, John Luke's In Minnesota books are my favorites. It's nearly impossible to write a detailed caption of any railroad scene here without referencing one. On Facebook, Ted Merrill writes, The Maryland and Pennsylvania by William Modiner takes the cake. Brian J. Smith writes, The Mohawk That Refused to Abdicate and Other Tales. David P. Morgan's prose really helps encapsulate the flickering flame of that vanishing era. And Dean Musara writes, I admit that I haven't read many rail history books, but The Wreck of the Old 97 is one that sticks out in my mind. It details the events leading up to the disaster and, while it can be a bit dry at times, gave me a better understanding of this crash that I had only heard about through its ballad. And lastly, from the RoundhousePodcast.com, Sam Livingston writes, The Bessemer Lake Erie Railroad, 1869 to 1969 by Roy C. Beaver. Thanks for the book recommendations to everybody who responded. It's great to see that many of you are readers of railroad history, as I'm becoming one myself, and I'm looking, as I mentioned last time, to explore more ways of adding book reviews or book discussions into the podcast. Your question of the day for this episode is, what guest mainline steam locomotive would you like to have appear at Strasburg Railroad? Try to keep it a little realistic. I mean, yes, you could say you'd love to see Big Boy, but let's see if we could have ones that might have some chance of actually appearing at Strasburg. Let me know on the roundhousepodcast.com. Links to social media are there. If you're new to the show, the website is also a great place to catch up on the 110 episodes you haven't heard yet. Thank you guys for listening, and remember, as always, that the Roundhouse is our house.